meeting that we've had outside of our organizational meeting. So I would say at this point, you've probably had somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 or 12 weeks to meet with your partner and just build that relationship and that connection. As always, I'm going to start off with introducing two lovely presidents that we have here. One is the president of AIA Virginia, Beth Reeder, who, Beth, if you want to share a few words, we'd love to hear from you.
Sure, thanks, Corey. Well, welcome everybody and happy Friday. So glad you have the time, that you're taking your time away from your busy day to be with us today. And many thanks also to our panelists who are so generously sharing their time and their expertise and their insights with us all. So thanks for being here. Awesome.
Thank you, Madam President. And then from AIAS, I know last time we were together, you met their newly installed president, Sarah. She's not with us today, so I've asked the executive director, who's my counterpart and partner in crime, Carla, if you would love to say a few words on behalf of the AIAS.
I will, and hi everyone. Happy Friday as well. And thank you, President Reeder, for your continued support, and certainly to all the panelists for taking time out. And shout out to my partner in crime, Corey. He's done a tremendous amount of work behind the scenes to pull this together, and we definitely appreciate the support. Vice President Takatatsu is unfortunately not able to be here due to a personal matter to attend on the West Coast, but she also wanted to extend the thanks on behalf of all our members. We're loving this program still. I think, as Corey mentioned, there's been some really great bright spots and some really key lessons learned. And we're excited to continue as we get into the start of the fall semester. So many of our members started returning to school this week, and of course we'll continue to return as we get into September here. So we're really excited as membership kicks off for us, how we can continue to build on this program with all the wonderful support and energy and momentum. So thanks, Corey, for your continued leadership on this, and we're looking forward to today's discussion.
Thank you so much, Karma, for those kind words. And every time I join in this meeting, I just get excited about the next one that's ahead. I really love this program. It's one of my favorite highlights of the week or the month, if you will. And so, you know, as we look at the agenda, the reason we came together today was not only just to you know, see each other and exchange any stories or needs that you might have as you've been embarking on this journey, but Karma and I thought it'd be good to start pivoting, if you will, and start bringing content that we think could help some of our young professionals and maybe even set a foundation for some of your discussions as you move forward. So today, we thought we might focus on the elements of your resume and your portfolio, as well as interviewing, especially at a time like this, right, where opportunities may be far and few between. If you're looking for a job, how do you make the most of the opportunity when it comes down, when that fastball comes to the plate, how do you make sure you hit that home run, right? And so we have a panel discussion with 4 super talented and successful individuals today. And, you know, they'll certainly speak a little bit about themselves in just a moment, but at a high level, we have Scott Campbell, who's here, and he's in your top tile that just waved at you. And he's a principal and certainly not an emerging professional. He's emerged if you're a principal, but he's a mid-level career professional. And to be in your 30s and become a principal of a mid-sized firm is super impressive. We also have Paul Battaglia. If you could wave in the upper right-hand tile on my screen. Paul Battaglia is someone with a diverse set of experience. He's a principal at a large firm, Clark Nixon, which is actually a multidisciplinary firm. And so that'll be certainly a different perspective where you're working with architects and engineers. And he's actually a former educator as well, so has a myriad of experiences. The third panelist is Tia Lunsford, who's in the upper left-hand corner. Tia is a tremendous friend of mine. We go back to high school. We were in the same biology class back in the 90s, and we've always stayed in touch. And she is actually a certified professional in human resources, and she works at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. So not so much in the architecture industry. As architects, none of us went to school for HR, right? And so we thought it'd be helpful to bring a certified HR professional to the table for this discussion. And then lastly, we have Paula Loomis, who she's an individual who just made a successful career in an alternative mode of our industry. So not in traditional practice, but lots of work with the military, where she oversaw bases, lots of operations, and now she is a senior planner and a director of design, I believe, at the Urban Collaborative. I've always joked with Paula that she has so many credentials and initials after her name that her business cards are with an 11 by 17 paper. So she doesn't even have normal business cards. So with that, that hopefully sets the stage for today's discussion. And I will pass it around to each panelist to just kind of elaborate a little bit on what I've said and just share something with the audience that they might not know about you. So who wants to start off?
Corey, I'll go. So yeah, Paul Battaglia, I've been a principal. I've been with Clark Nexon for the last 9 years, but as Corey mentioned, I've pivoted back and forth between academia and practice. So right now the carousel is on practice, but I worked for about 11 years at a number of different firms in and around Richmond, Virginia. And then the phone rang. I was teaching in the interior design department at VCU. The phone rang. It was Hunter Pittman, whom some of you would know, who invited me back to Virginia Tech, my alma mater, to teach. And so I went there for 2 years, and then from there to NC State, go Wolfpack, until practice and some connections called us back to the Hampton Roads area of Virginia. So yeah, we've been here 9 years, and the first couple of those years I was also teaching at Hampton University. So glad to be with you today.
I'll go. So I'm Scott Campbell. I am a principal, as Corey said, at Via Design. We're a firm of about 15, 16 people. And I consider myself still emerging. I hope to be continuing to emerge as I go through my career. But I had the fortune to land at a smaller firm and be able to land into a principal role early on in my career and kind of grow us into a mid-sized firm. So I could tell you a little bit more about that, I think, as we get into the Q&A, but I graduated in a recession and landed at a firm as a, employee number 3. And, 10 years later, we're at 15, 16 people. So lots of stories to be told there, and can share a little bit more about that as we get into the Q&A. So.
Tia?
Hello, my name is Tia Lunsford, and as Corey mentioned, we go way back to high school. It's actually chemistry, because I don't like biology. So chemistry class with Mrs. Pittman, I think is what it was. So, but we've kept in touch. So I've been in HR for about 14 years, and I've been at the museum for about 4 years in that time frame. I actually, to be honest with you, fell into HR. I was actually kind of on track to go and do something as far as healthcare administration. And so anyways, I fell into HR, love HR, enjoy it. And I enjoy working with people and helping them to also land, their ultimate job opportunities. And so I just try to really work with people and set them up for success so that they can get those job opportunities from there. So, yep.
And good afternoon. This is Paula Loomis. As Corey mentioned, I'm a person who has had an alternative career, albeit an alternative career as an architect, planner, designer. So I actually went to college sponsored by the Air Force, and they sponsored me to be an architect. So they sent me specifically to study architecture. And then I went on active duty and did a lot of work with bases. I was very lucky. I got sent to Langley Air Force Base, which was designed by Albert Kahn, who is famous from Detroit. And so very good experience there. I then did a little bit of jumping around, but after that also worked as a civil servant for the government. So I spent 30 years in both active duty and reserve for the Air Force. I spent 30 years with civil service for the federal government. Worked my way up in both of those activities. At the end of my civil service career, I was the Coast Guard's deputy for facilities at their headquarters, and also the executive director for an organization that reached beyond facilities called Shore Infrastructure Logistics Center. So it had facilities, it had all the buoys, everything you see floating out on the water, all the aids to navigation. It had all the vehicles, everything. So big jobs in both of those. I really like architecture and I really like urban planning. And so when I got the opportunity to retire, I took a position with a firm called Urban Collaborative, whom I'm with now, a very flexible firm that does architecture and some urban design. And I'm their director of research, which means I also get to dabble in research alternatives, write books, do all kinds of fun things. I'm also teaching at Stevens Institute of Technology. I've taught at 3 other universities. So I taught at Hampton University in their architecture program for a while, similar to Paul. I taught at the Air Force Institute of Technology. I've been an advisor to 3 or 4 PhD students at different locations around the world, including 2 now in Salford, England. So just some great, fabulous experience. I like AIA. You'd probably consider me an AIA junkie. And so I served from being my local chapter president all the way up to the national board and the strategic council. And I'm a fellow in AIA. I'm also a fellow in the Society of American Military Engineers, which is where facilities kind of falls. And so I look forward to talking with you guys and figuring out what you need to know from us in order to make your careers successful.
Well, thank you to each of you. And I think there's no surprise that we're very fortunate to have each of you share your time, talents, and expertise with us today. So we're getting ready to roll up our sleeves and get right into it. So I want to be respectful of our time, and we said we go to 1, so we want to try to hold true to that. So as you listen to the conversation, you can feel free to use the chat to put in your questions, and at the end of the session, you can also just take yourself off of mute and ask questions also. But feel free to use the chat as a bank if you think of something you're afraid you might forget it at the end. So let's roll up our sleeves and get right into it. And I think the first question we're going to send to Tia, and it's just about right now and the challenging times that we're seeing where lots of industries are laying off and very few are hiring. So do you have any advice on how to make sure your resume stands out in terms of formatting and things like that, just to make sure you get noticed?
Absolutely, and thank you again for the question. So just a reminder to everybody, your resume provides that brief snapshot of who you are on paper to prospective employers. So you always want to be sure to put your best foot forward and set yourself up for success. And so you should definitely make sure that your resume includes things like a strong summary of your qualifications. Tell, this employer, what is it that you're bringing to the table? Also, another thing is, you probably have heard this before, including keywords from job announcements within your resume. For instance, if, that job announcement is asking for, knowledge with, I did a little bit of research, SketchUp or AutoCAD or anything like that, and you have experience with that, to make sure that you highlight that and make that known. The other thing is, you want to make sure that your resume is short, no more than 1 to 2 pages. I would say at the most, it should be concise. Definitely make sure that also that you have someone maybe review your resume before you submit it, just to ensure that you have no typos or grammatical errors. A lot of managers, when they get those resumes, they are literally scanning. And so if there's something that kind of, distracts them, then they're probably going to move on. So you want to make sure that they can focus in. The other thing as well is, you want to include your academic achievements within your resume and capture that there. And then don't discount if you had any volunteer or internship experience as it pertains to the job that you're applying for. Make sure you include those items. And another thing that people don't really think about, I think when they're applying, I see a lot of applications from my perspective come in from, prospective applicants or potential hires, and they fill out their application, they fill out their resume, but they don't include a cover letter. And the cover letter is another, just another avenue to kind of really express your interest in the company, but not just any old cover letter that says, "Hi, I saw your job posting I'm interested. But I think it's an opportunity for individuals to, write a very thoughtful cover letter and include that to accompany their resume. You can personalize a little bit more in your cover letter. For example, you should be doing things like looking at that organization's missions and value statements. If there's something in that that connects with you, definitely include that. And maybe what is it that stands out in those mission and value statements that inspired you to really apply for the organization? Employers like to see some sort of connection, I think, with that. And just to kind of give you an example, and it's an opportunity, like I said, for you to be creative. You guys are very creative, and I think in what you do. And so it's just just think of it as an opportunity to be creative. My husband, for instance, applied for a job. He's also a Trekkie. He literally based his cover letter on Star Trek. And you know what they told him when they got to the interview? They're like, your cover letter, we were like, we definitely have to meet this guy, because they were apparently also Trekkies as well. So again, figure out how to be creative with that. So, yep, that's all I have.
Right.
Corey, can I add something?
Absolutely.
Since architects are visual people, I take the opportunity on a resume to put little bullet photographs down the side of your projects and visual. When you're going through resumes and it's all verbiage, it's figuring out how to make everything bulletized so someone can quickly see what talents you have that they would like to use. Put those talents up front that you think they might want to use. And since we're all visual folks, fill it full of images.
Great comment. Before I pass it over to Beth, just want a follow-up question real quickly for Tia regarding the cover letter. How long should that be?
I would say no more than one page. You don't want to write a dissertation. Again, another concise document.
Great, thanks, Tia. That's really great insight that you gave us, and Paula too. So the next question is, when a resume hits your desk, what is the first thing that you look at? So Paula, can you lead us into that question?
Sure. So the first thing I look at is would this person potentially be a good fit for what we need for them to do? And so that really, I think Tia talked about tailoring it to the firm, and it's really important that you actually look at what the job announcement is, do some research about what the firm does, or the government organization, if you're applying to a government organization, what they do, and then tailor that resume so that those things pop up in the beginning and people don't have to search for them. And I would recommend bullet style in there. So definitely looking at projects that they've done. And then secondly, kind of if the person's going to be a good fit culture-wise.
Okay, great. What about you, Scott? What do you look for?
Yeah, I will. I'll stress Tia's comment on the spelling and grammar check. You would not believe some of the things, like spelling mistake, like blatant errors and some of that. It's very important. We're not meeting you face to face. This is your first introduction. Even that step of like, I wrote something and I spell checked it is just telltale sign number one. I like to treat them as think of it as like an RFP trying to get a project. If 50, 60, 75 firms are going for this, reviewers are looking for anything and everything to discard you. And so think about it like that and take away all excuses and then let what the content of the resume stand out. And so eliminate the spelling errors, eliminate that, and then make sure your content is really good and concise. So.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, not proofreading your work, that doesn't bode well for when you're doing
number one,
doing deadlines and trying to do things that really need precision. So great.
It matters. It really does.
Yeah. How about you, Paul?
Yeah, I'm gonna say the proofreading again, just because it's really absurd to see somebody take the time to allegedly put down their the summary of their life and then not manage to look through it a second time and find a spelling error. And I'm also one of those people that's cursed with, you know, if I walk by a spelling error in 4-point type, you know, at 10 yards, it still leaps out at me. So I saw there was a question in the chat about the use of color. Maybe, you know, as long as kind of, you know, the images are clear and the images, you know, help reinforce the story that you're trying to tell by your words, you know, or whether your color is trying to do that. You know, I suppose the question is intended in terms of like a graphic bar or a heading or a frame or something like that. Some of those get pretty silly pretty quickly. You know, we're really looking at the resume to get some basic information about you. And so things that kind of compete or confuse, you probably want to be a little bit careful of. But if there is a format that maybe also corresponds to something you're trying to get across in your portfolio, so that we see that they were designed by the same person and that there was a kind of a parallel sensitivity there, then it could actually strengthen the submission. So just be thoughtful about it.
Tia, do you have anything to add to that question?
No, actually, I think Paul kind of hit it on the head. I mean, you have to, I mean, I understand about the visual appeal and that sort of thing, but you just got to be careful that it doesn't, you know, distract from, you know, what you're really trying to convey.
Right, great. Okay, the next question is, in your opinion, what two things matter most on a resume? And we might be kind of overlapping your questions here, but Paul, do you want to take that one first?
Sure. Yeah, so I think this is going to be really simplistic, but I think it's basic information and differentiating information. And what I mean by that is, you know, we need to know that we need to know that you went to architecture school, and probably we need to know, you know, that it may be important to us that it was an accredited program, right? It might be important to us that you got that first professional accredited degree. And you know, there are other things that we're probably going to ask about, or they're going to come up at some point, right? Like maybe it is your GPA. In terms of differentiating experience, I'm talking about the things that really improve your viability as a candidate. So what are the things that kind of demonstrate or make evident that you either possess or have worked to develop certain kinds of characteristics that would be helpful to us? You know, have you spent time collaborating? Have you spent time being part of a team? That could be a sports team. Do you have activities not only that enrich you and kind of bring breadth, but have you exhibited leadership in at least some of those? You know, have you had an officer position, or have you had some other, you know, captaincy or some other position of leadership? Personally, right, a lot of these things, by the way, that we're mentioning are kind of personal preferences to some extent. But I tend to like range and breadth, but not range and breadth at the expense of attention. And so, you know, it's great to see that someone has done kind of their academic work and maybe 2 or 3 or 4 other things. It starts to be concerning when someone has done their academic work and they've done 27 things, because I start to wonder whether we're counting like a rainy Saturday at a soup kitchen and giving that the same weight as some of these other things that we've been involved in. And I'm also going to add something that is not helpful. And those are, I'm going to call them the consumer report self-assessment of your capabilities and skills. Please spare us those. I mean, those the thing where it's like, I am a 9 out of 10 in Rhino. Well, maybe you are, maybe you're not. I don't know. That's probably not much of a credential. It may or may not be helpful for us to kind of see some of those things that you've worked on. But broadly speaking, what you've been doing with those prior to professional practice is probably not exactly what we will expect for you to be doing with them in professional practice. So again, it's kind of a personal preference, but the self-reported consumer report version of the litany of skills, I think, is amusing, but not necessarily enlightening.
I was going to add, people talked about other activities than work activities. And two things come to mind. One is, that's for a young person, that's a great place to show leadership skills, as Paul mentioned. If you happen to have been out of school for maybe a couple months, maybe up to a year, and you still haven't found your correct landing spot, it's a great way for you to show that, especially if they're related to the profession, that you're still interested in the profession, that you're growing yourself in the profession, that you're doing other things to keep up. And so that helps with people that might have not quite found where they're going to land, etc. If you happen to have a resume and you've worked for a little bit that shows gaps, or you worked before you went back to school to earn your architecture degree, kind of explaining those gaps is good. If people bounce from job to job to job, it's good to know why you bounce from job to job to job. And hopefully it's for personal growth, for some other measure that you can help explain with a little note at the bottom. Other than, you know, if you're bouncing, we're wondering why you're bouncing. And then when you explain projects, explain exactly what you did. It's great to say that you worked on the Taj Mahal, but it's better to know which portion of the Taj Mahal work you actually did.
Hey, Paula, can I add on
Sure.
to what you were saying, you know, explaining those gaps? That's also where the cover letter, again, I think kind of comes in and helps to support. You're kind of, you know, telling your story as well.
Mm-hmm.
This has been, wow, that's great stuff. And, you know, up until this point, we've focused mostly on the written aspect of selling yourself, right? The resume, the cover letter. I like to switch gears a little bit and talk about the graphical portion to the portfolio, right? That's what you kind of live and die for as a thesis student, right? Getting that guy tight and ready for publication. So Paul, I'm gonna come back to you, man. What are the two things you look for in a portfolio when it hits your desk? What are the two things that your eyes are just gonna go right to?
Yeah, so there aren't two, but I do have four. So some of you may or may not have been in the audience. Actually, my wife and I gave a tandem presentation about portfolios at Architecture Exchange East a couple of years ago that was kind of from the academic and the practitioner point of view. So some of this may sound a little well rehearsed, forgive me, but I'm standing by these convictions. So first of all, let me caveat some of these talks, some of these thoughts, because we're talking about an entry-level portfolio, right? So what would be expected from an entry-level portfolio would be categorically different than you know, someone who's either at the precipice or has recently achieved licensure, much less someone else who's further in their career. But if you'll allow me to kind of concentrate on entry-level portfolio, one is design skills. Right? Hard to define, one of those things that you kind of know what it is when you see it, but you know, we are looking for design skills. Another one, graphic skills. And yes, those are related, but they're also different. Another one, storytelling. And what I mean by storytelling is, do you have a correspondence between the text that's on your portfolio plates and the images? In other words, if you're telling us that this architectural condition or this architectural phenomena or this kind of diagrammatic analysis was the parti for the project, is that what we see when we look at the images? Or are you saying one thing and showing another? And that doesn't quite work. I also mean in terms of emphasis. Right. So if you know, if the thing you're writing about you're saying is the most important, but it's a tiny little thumbnail on that same plate, and there's some other drawing that kind of hogs the space, then I'm not sure that you know how to tell a story. I'm not sure how you know how to reconcile what you're saying and what you're showing. And so really, it's about editing. It's about emphasis. It's about editing. Editing. It has as much to do with what you include and how you compose what's included as it does with excluding things. I mentioned range earlier, and a range can be great, but if you've only thrown a pot once and it was awful, don't show me that you threw a pot. You know, now, if you really are, if you have achieved something and you've learned about your architecture through silkscreen or through photography or through sketching or through ceramics, then by all means show us that. because it demonstrates that you have a breadth in terms of your appreciation and your approach and your skill. And so that can be very enlightening and reinforce your argument. But if some of your stuff is bad, you don't have to show the second year project just because you turned it in someday, right? I mean, you want to be showing your best work and the work that's most indicative of your range. And as was mentioned earlier, you know, if you had a part in a project rather than you were the sole author, acknowledge that somehow. You know, just kind of let us know that that was not only that it was a group project, but you know what your role within the group was. It is the case that often you are competing with your former academic colleagues, and so we've got portfolios that we've put down, and we're seeing the same images of the same project, and we're starting to wonder who did which part of that.
That not only happens coming out of college, that happens later. I've been on fellowship board juries, and I get 3 projects from 3 different people, and it's all the same project. Yeah. And Paul, you also helped to answer Roberta's question. She asked when is too much information too much? And it's when it tells a different story than what you're intending to do. You can just lop that part off.
Would anyone else like to weigh in on that question? Scott?
Yeah, sure. I mean, for me, I think Paul did it, you know, much more eloquently than I would say, but talent trumps everything, and graphic and how you present that is the second. You know, those are the 2 things. It's like, is the talent there? You just know it when you see it. Is it your best work? And then how is it being presented and communicated graphically? Those are like, that's it. You know, that's what we look at. That's what we see. And that is the measuring stick. I think getting those 2 things down solid. I think Paul had a great point with don't present work that you're not happy with or you don't think it's your best. Don't put it, leave it. I'd rather have one awesome project that is like top tier, you know, the best thing that you've ever done than 8 to show me that you've done all the work that you had to do to graduate. That's not what we're looking at. You know, show me your best, show me where you are right now, and show me what you want to do, what you're passionate about.
Hey, Scott, I'd add something. You said talent tops everything, and it does until you call the first reference. And
that's true.
That this person can't work with anybody else. And
Very
then
true.
you have to weigh off whether you want to hire the talent versus the person that works well with others.
Yeah, this is straight from a portfolio. I've never met the person.
Yeah.
So I totally agree.
Paula, so at the risk of being regressive, I'm really glad you mentioned that, because one thing I'd like to tell everyone is that it's important to have references. It's important when you ask. It's important, A, that you ask someone if they will serve as a reference, and B, ask them specifically if they will be a good reference or if they have any concerns. When I was teaching, you know, students, when they wanted to go to graduate school or whatever, you know, they'd come see me. And for some of them, I'd be happy to, first of all, I gave them that advice, so they should have known better. Second of all, you know, if they came to me, you know, I'd say, yeah, you know, green light, great, you've been an excellent student, great. If I had concerns or reservations of any kind, I tried really hard to be able to share that. You know, so yes, I'll be a reference, but do know that if I'm asked, I have this concern. I thought I had the obligation to be straightforward about that. Not everyone does. Not everyone does. Some people will say, yes, I'll be a reference, and they'll leave that second part unsaid. And then when someone picks up the phone, you know, they're really talented, but they're a prima donna, and, you know, we could substitute any other number of combinations. But so please, please, please check to make sure check with them first, right? This blind call, you know, hey, what do you know about whatever? Well, I can guess why you're asking me, but I would have liked to have known from them, you know, how that I was going to be contacted. So that's one. Also, back on portfolio, just for a second, I should have mentioned this. Let me tell you why, for me, it's that list of the 4 things. And it speaks to what I believe, especially at the entry level, is the nature of the relationship, and it should be a relationship between the applicant and the firm. And what you're trying to do is get that relationship off to a good footing to lay a foundation for success. And from my perspective, what that means is that we want evidence that the things you could and should have been learning in the academy, in school, you have the mastery of those things, onto which we will then graft, because we have both the privilege and the obligation of grafting the skills that more rightly come through practice. I'm not really expecting to see a very careful, detailed section. That would be surprising. In most of the cases, you notice that what people are kind of pulling aside as a section detail is the field condition, and not actually where anything gets resolved, right? Because they don't know that part yet. They really haven't, unless they copied it out of Allen or Ching. But they don't really, you don't really know that. So you don't need to show us that, right? That we'll work with you on kind of that. But some of these other things that I mentioned, at least in my estimation, mean that you have spent the time with both success and failure in order to achieve a really good groundwork, a really good foundation on which we can graft the skills of practice. If you've not done that, there's going to be precious little time or attention because of the demands of practice to achieve that or remediate that. And so I feel like we need to see it in the portfolio so that we can help you acquire the other skills.
Hey, Paul, I was going to tag on back to the reference thing one more time and recommend something, and then hit on something I've seen in the chat box. One is, if you get a chance to actually talk to the person who is going to give you the reference, or if they're doing a written reference, if you get a chance to give them some tickler bullets, you can help marry up what the future employer is going to see in a portfolio with the same comments that come from this person. So if I talk to Paul and said, hey, will you give me a reference? And he goes, yeah, I guess so. Then I can say, you know, I want to work for this firm for these reasons. This is the type of firm it is. Would you mind highlighting these 3 things? And then hopefully he picks up those 3 things when he gets the phone call. And the other thing that Rona Rothenberg mentioned in the chat box, and great kudos to her for doing this, and Tia, the cover letter shows that you can actually write. I don't know how many times we're looking for a young person that we can get to write something. And sometimes it's the older folks like me writing it, because we haven't thought far enough that we not only have to hire talent for drawing, but we have to hire talent for putting together RFPs, and that's request for proposals, in case the young folks don't know what it is. But you need strong writing skills and analytical thinking skills as much as you need the other.
I think that's a good segue into Claire's question too, in terms of how it might be different, the entry level versus if someone has licensure. One, everything that Paula just mentioned, we'd expect to see in some measure, right? We'd like to be able to see that demonstrated. And 2, then we do want to see, you know, the fact that construction documents have been achieved and a team has been led, and, you know, we've kind of met the standard of professional practice in terms of project management and the production of construction drawings and construction documents. Ooh, specs are in there too. You know, so those are the kinds of things that I would add. You know, it doesn't mean we wouldn't also be curious about design skills. Hopefully we would see that through the documentation. And so it's probably not just going to be a set of construction documents, much less stacks of construction documents, right? But it's also going to be other ways to document and hopefully write and speak about the project.
Very great insight. And Paula, thanks for touching on Rona's comments. I was going to do that next. And as we're looking, for the sake of time, we're going to skip over the next couple. I think we've actually talked about a lot of those next couple of questions. So Beth, for the 8th question, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
All right, I'm unmuted. Can you hear me? All right, so the 8th question is, when describing the attributes of a great team member, you hear phrases like self-starting, punctual, meets deadlines, inquisitive, does whatever it is needed to get the job done. But what do you look for in a resume and or a portfolio to clue you in that this candidate actually has these attributes? And Paula, could you start us off, please?
Oh, sure. So actually, one of the places that I lean on this, well, one, you want to see some group project, hopefully, in there at some point. And if not, then maybe just evidence that you've done something as a group. I know Paul mentioned playing on a team. If you can be a captain of a team, that shows that you can help organize people, that you can help put up with personalities in people, etc. So it's great to show either some sort of leadership ability, etc. And when someone calls your references, hopefully they will say something like, you know, this person just thinks ahead. This person understands whatever the goal of whatever you're doing. So if it was a student project, they understood the goal of that. If it's a part-time job that you had, they would come and they would say, this person understands where the firm was trying to go, and they helped us move a step forward. And when you get a job, I always like the employee that comes up, one, tells me about problems ahead of time and says, hey, I ran into this problem or this issue, and here's the 2 or 3 ways I could solve it. Which way would you like for me to take? Or here's the one way I came up to solve it. What you don't like is the person that comes up and says, boss, I have a problem. I'm telling you late about it, and I got no solution.
Good point.
Yeah, I agree, Paula. And I'd add, you know, empathy is kind of one of those things I think that you sense when you're around people. It may be hard to evidence, although one would hope that references would be able to speak to empathy. And when considering references, particularly if you're in one of those kind of positions that's not quite entry level, but you're not quite interviewing for the CEO either, think about some of your references not being at a higher altitude than you on the org chart. You know, think about a team member, or think about someone that you've been mentoring, perhaps. And don't lose sight of that in school as well, right? You might have tutored someone through statics or tutored someone through structures, and that person can speak to some of your skills in terms of being a team player. Empathy is one. On the more kind of tangible side, team science, right? So that's an emerging terminology, right? Our friends at the National Science Foundation are probably out ahead of a lot of other disciplines when they talk about it. But for me, one of the places where that gains traction is the ability to identify, define, nest, negotiate, monitor, and ultimately achieve goals and objectives. So, you know, what is the client trying to do? What is the firm trying to do? What is the team trying to do? What are each of the individuals within the team trying to accomplish? What are the developmental opportunities or other interests that are available? And how do we kind of negotiate those and give back the proper feedback with empathy and candor, and keep everyone moving forward the way that they could? So that might be something that some of you want to look into.
And if you all will excuse me, I'll tag on to what Paul said about references. When I sat on the fellowship juries, we would sometimes have folks that they wanted to have the biggest big name architect give them a reference letter. It was way better to have someone who has worked close with you talk about you and how important it is, and what your skills bring to the table.
Yeah, I'll add, I'd like to jump in here too. I think this is the hardest thing to show on a resume and a portfolio. We call it the gumption factor. Like, how much gumption does a person have in that ability to self-start, you know, that they're excited, they're passionate. It's really hard to do that in words. I think to Tia's point, I would probably have interviewed her husband too if somebody wrote a cover letter about that based around Star Trek. I mean, to me, that it's just a differentiator, something that's creative. You know, so that creative writing, you know, consider it, it's got to be professional, but there might be an opportunity in that cover letter to kind of demonstrate some of that gumption factor that gets you in the door. You know, I don't know what that is, and yes, it's got to be professional, but that's an opportunity. You know, it's really, really hard to do this without meeting a person, and that would be my follow-up, is like, you got to meet the person. Yeah, but doing that little piece that's different is an opportunity.
And I would say that also, that willingness to put yourself in another person's shoes and do that little extra, or to solve problems on your own, that's great once you get hired knowledge as well.
Great responses. And for the next question, I'm going to come back to Tia, because now that we're in a virtual world, right? And it's not uncommon nowadays to have virtual interviews. Tia, I wonder if you could share a little bit about how might you prepare for a virtual interview that might be different than an in-person, or what could you expect in such an environment?
Absolutely. Another great question. So I would say that in most cases, preparing for a virtual interview is going to be, pretty much the same as preparing for an in-person interview. Like, for instance, you're going to, you need to know your audience, you need to dress the part, you need to present early, you need to have your materials ready. And so, there's a few more things that we have to be cognizant of in this virtual environment that we're in now because of COVID. One of the things you want to do, you want to make sure you test your, equipment, make sure your mic and your camera is working beforehand. Also, think about, when you get that call for your interview, where am I going to what's the best place in my house? Because a lot of us are at home right now. To actually conduct this interview, because you don't want to have a whole bunch of, background noises and interruptions. Although I know that, a lot of employers are going to be probably flexible because more people are at home than are usually there. Normally you go to an interview, it's just you and the hiring manager or the hiring panel. But if you have children or parents or pets even, I don't know how many Zoom calls I've been on, I'm trying to talk to somebody and their pet is like going off in the background. And those are things, obviously some of it we can't really control, but we can just try to minimize. And I think a lot of people will be, flexible in that case, but those are just some of the things you want to be mindful of. Also your background, what's in your background, you don't want your, toilet bowl or anything like that visible in the, you just want to be cognizant of that and make sure that you can be in a place, like I said, where you can focus, you can concentrate, and there's not a lot of background noise. Also, I think with, your portfolios and things like that, if you're submitting any supplemental material, you want to make sure that you make arrangements beforehand to submit that. If you can, or, make sure that you're familiar with how to, share that while you're actually conducting the virtual meeting. A lot of times, for instance, in my meetings, I'll share, documents, I'll load them in the chat room, or I'll share it on the screen so that others can see it. So, you just want to, be cognizant and mindful of that. And then last but not least, a lot of people don't think about this too. Because we're in this virtual environment, I think a lot of people have more relaxed expectations about dress and all of that. You still want to dress the part. You still want to put your best foot forward where that's concerned. That's pretty much what I would also say. And then, I think the last thing too, make sure you silence your phones, anything that's going to distract you while you're, trying to, convey why you're the best candidate for this position. And, just know that there will probably also be some awkward pauses in between. When you're in an interview, you're able to see, that person kind of taking notes. But, it's a little different in a virtual environment. So be comfortable with those, kind of pauses in between.
Can I say something about punctuality? I think most people will try to be very punctual, and I like people that are punctual. I like people that are 5 minutes ahead of time, 10 minutes ahead of time, but I've had people come up, and when interviews were being done in person, they showed up half an hour, 45 minutes, and they sat right outside my office and stared at me the whole time. You don't need to do that. You need to be close to where you need to be. But, and in this case, since it's virtual, it's great to test it out a little ahead of time, then log in at 10 minutes ahead of time, 5 minutes ahead of time. But don't be out there a half an hour ahead of time looking for that person to be there for you. We know you're excited to interview. We're excited to interview you, but we got other things to do too.
Great insight. And we're going to take, that's a great follow into the last and final question. Each of you have probably had some great interviews, whether it's virtual or in person. Tell us some of the highlights of what made those interviews great in either platform, virtual or in person. Scott, you want to take that one?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'd say I haven't had a great virtual interview. That has yet to happen. I'm going to say I would recommend pushing for that in-person meeting, because those are all the ones that I've had. I mean, I got my job. I'm sitting where I am. I'm on this panel, not because of my resume, not because of my portfolio, but because I met the founding principal of this firm when I was in college, and she saw something in my talent and skills, and I could verbally communicate that better than anybody. That was my skill set, is I could describe my idea, and that came from years of practice with Chicago studio at Virginia Tech, dedicated practice time on presenting and communicating and in person. And so that's the only reason I'm here. I would not get a job right now based on talent, based on my resume and portfolio right now. And so I would say my greatest interviews have been when we get to see somebody's personality come out. So we recently hired an individual, interviewed an individual the last couple months. We had an in-person meeting. It was perfectly fine. We spaced everybody out, and we felt really, really good about it because he could communicate and tell us about his projects, his skills, his experience, and then his passions of what he was looking for at our firm. And you can't get that virtually. We did a virtual interview first, and it was the most awkward, weird thing. We both had technical issues. He did, we did. And at the end of the day, we were like, well, let's get him in here. We still think there's something there with his experience. Let's get him in the door. And it went great. I mean, the way he spoke about what he wanted was what we wanted to hear, and how it related to the firm. And so I would say, communication is critical in these things, and having that in-person face-to-face is just invaluable.
Awesome response, Scott. Paula or Paul, do you want to weigh in, or Tia?
Well, I was going to say the best interview you have is when you personally connect with the person or the persons in the room. And then that, okay, this is going to be a great adventure, right? This is going to be the thing that I'm going to get up in the morning and want to go do. If you go into an interview and you don't have that personal connection, I would say don't worry about it. But also that's kind of an indication to keep interviewing at other firms too. Because in the long run, you want to feel like you really fit there, so you stay a long time. And I'm seeing Paul smile. I know he's going to say something.
I like that. I think it's important to know where you don't want to work as much as it is where you might want to work, right? And yeah, I think I might just mention again adaptability. Because we have our time and we have it set aside, and then we find out that the conference room we can't use, or the place we were going to go for lunch has got an event, and to have a candidate fall to pieces in the face of that is probably doesn't bode well for how she or he is going to react in the face of adversity further down the line, in whatever form that might take in terms of our work, our interpersonal issues. So the ability to roll with it. And what I mean by roll with it is not just let anything go, but have the perspective to understand this is really important. This doesn't matter so much. And to be able to have that demonstrated with any of the adversities that may or may not occur during the interview itself.
This is great. I'm kind of just monitoring the chat logs. A few awesome points that have come in about eye contact and not being afraid to in the interview say, hey, I got to step away and get this dog locked up, or whatever you need to do to make sure it's a successful interview. And you know how I am. I always like to end these things on a great note. So I'm gonna go off script for just a second, and I'm gonna come back to Scott, who in your introduction you had mentioned that you started as an emerging professional at your firm. It was only 3 people, I think is what you said, and now it's about 16. Could you talk a little bit about how an emerging professional can play such an impactful role in helping to grow a firm from a small to a mid-sized firm? Hate to put you on the spot, but I had to
Hey
do it.
man, put away. I like to say that my gumption factor was off the charts. So I graduated in 2009, and not a great time to graduate. I would say less than 50% of my class got jobs in architecture. That's probably a fair statement. And so I rolled up my sleeves. I did anything and everything that I was asked to do. I was seeking constantly things that were way above my head in terms of like experience and my level. But if I expressed an eager to learn and eager to get involved, tell me about that. What do I need to know? Can I just come with you to job sites, Donna? My mentor, I had a mentor that was just invaluable to me as a young architect. And so I'll say that point too, Corey, like the value of some of these relationships that we can build in this program, finding that person. It doesn't even need to be with your firm. I mean, it could be somebody else, but having that person where we were just traveling to and from job sites for hours at a time and just having conversations about architectural practice and the lessons of running and owning a firm for the last 30 years.
Wow.
You know, at 21 years old, I learned things that I would never even have known to ask. And so just, you know, ask your principals to go to lunch, go to coffee, ask your, you know, superiors to project managers, say, hey, let's get to know each other. And that's when you get those kind of mentorship conversations where you can learn more about them and the stories behind how practice related. And then cannot stress enough the kind of eagerness and desire to do everything. I got licensed, I mean, at 23, because I was wearing every single hat that, you know, my IDP hours needed to. I felt confident. I even studied for the wrong exam, found out the night before and stayed up the entire night, felt comfortable enough to take it. And because I had had such exposure to like construction documents at such an early stage, still passed it. And so having that confidence and that exposure to a wide variety at a young age was something that I wanted, I sought after. And I fortunately had a mentor that was, you know, let me run and do everything that I wanted to do. So.
And that's exactly why I came to you last, Scott.
Yeah.
Drop the hammer on them. And as we're coming up on 1 o'clock, I want to say thank you all for being here. We'll skip the last portion of the agenda, which was just some general updates. But the one thing I would like for you to think about is, you know, we do have an abundance of mentors. And so if there's anybody who would like 2 mentors, you could just send Kathy Gusky a note. And Kathy, if you could just type your email in the chat box, send her a note. Scott touched on a really important point. It's just, you know, connecting and building these relationships. We have more than enough mentors. And so if you would like 2 of them and just a second set of ears or eyes to bounce ideas and thoughts of as we navigate through this journey, shoot Kathy a note and we'll get you connected with a second mentor, right? You can never know too many people. So with that, we'll think about our next program in about another 6 weeks or so. I hope everything is going well with each of you and that maybe this conversation today will set the foundation for your next meeting with your partner. And maybe you can look at your resume together, or, you know, if you already work for somebody, you don't want them to think you're about to leave them. So if you don't have a job, right, work with your partner to look at your resume and portfolio based off of this conversation. You may have some great things to add to it. So I'll be in touch and I look forward to seeing each of you in about another 6 weeks or so. Madam.
So Corey, just real quick,
Yeah.
sorry, but so thanks to all the fellow panelists, thanks to AIA and AIS for organizing this. And to those who graduated this past year, congratulations, by the way. Keep the faith, right? And it can't stay this way forever. So don't let your frustrations get the better of you. Congratulations. Find something, a structure for your gap time. You have one, but congratulations.
Absolutely. Thank you, Paul. Before we go, I see Claire mentioned an important question. Yes, you can invite new students and new people to join this. Please send them the link, or you can tell them to reach out to Kathy and say they want to be a part of this. Either one, so we can get them on a roster, get them matched up. But yes, we'll take as many people as we can. So, all right, take care and enjoy your weekend, everyone. It's good to see you. Thank you, panelists.
No problem, Corey. Thanks, man.
All right.
Thank you.